Hello and welcome to our first Built Digital South Australia webinar today. My name is Rebecca Cicco and I am the co-chair of Built Digital South Australia, and I'll be providing a little update for you today before we commence our presentation. The first point of call is that I would like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we live and work. I would also like to pay respect to our elders past, present, and future. For those of you who don't know me, I am the co-chair of Built Digital SA and part of the committee. I'm also the principal of the Digital Enablement Advisory within Vircon. I also hold an important global role as the chair and founder of Women in BIM. A lot of the work I do is contribute to industry by providing insight and education through the affiliations that I work with, both locally and internationally. I also work very closely with feedback and industry standards reviews, and I develop industry groups to support these drivers. I'm very much an expert in the international standards of ISO 19650, and I also work very closely with our clients and partners on the digital implementation of BIM or digital engineering across our projects. So I guess to start with, it's probably an important point to reference in why Built Digital SA exists and really what the intention of the group is. Many of you know that Built Digital SA is a combination of the previously retired entities BIM SA and Build SA. Build SA was around for a number of years, hosting breakfast events and seminars across the built environment to support the implementation of BIM and digital construction processes, digital engineering across the industry. Built Digital SA goes beyond BIM, and we now discuss topics that look further into digital delivery and wider global impacts around digital, the uptake of smart cities and digital twins as an example. We work very closely with industry to educate, to share ideas, and to connect in with other groups across the built environment, both on a local and national level. Built Digital SA now forms part of the Australasian BIM Advisory Board's Industry Collaboration Group, which brings together all of the industry collaboration groups across the country to help implement and educate across the industry. So we would obviously like to thank our sponsors to start with. We know that there is obviously a number of different organisations that support our cause financially. I'd like to make specific reference to VinZero, an A2K company, who are our platinum sponsor. And we have a variety of sponsors here, not enough yet, so we're always welcoming new sponsors if you are interested. But essentially, our sponsors are Vircon, Lucid Consulting, Chris Sale, and Alexander Simmons. We know that the world is changing. I think the presentation today will give a little bit of insight around that, but with the impacts around the global population increases, obviously measuring a building or asset's performance, environmental concerns, and even carbon measurement, we know that the digital solutions are at the forefront of government policy across the country. We know also that here in South Australia, there are a variety of different initiatives supporting the impact of digital and that digital is making across the built environment. And as an industry group, we're trying to draw synergies between national objectives, local objectives, and obviously government drivers and project requests or project requirements across digital engineering and BIM. So as I mentioned, BIM and digital engineering is only a small part of this problem. There was only a conversation recently that I had with a number of different industry leaders where we discussed that there was still a huge problem across the built environment with the lack of skills and resources in BIM and digital engineering across the construction sector. So we're still quite challenged to meet the demands of our clients and to meet the demands of the industry in regard to these processes and solutions. We also know that many of our clients and asset owners and those asset procurers are now asking for and focusing on the data and the digital twin outcomes that may be produced. And this is becoming more and more commonplace across the industry in this country and also across the world. On top of that is also the impact of our urban landscapes and obviously the impact of smart cities. We know that digital assets must be developed, built, and then managed effectively so they can form part of a wider landscape of digital assets across a city to impact on a city level with people, pollution, services, health, and all services that exist across a city landscape. So from our last session, we hosted our first networking event in the evening at the end of March. We had our second very successful lunchtime event only last month, which was hosted at Vircon, which was very successful. We had a great turnout and we posted a summary of that event, which I'm sure you've all seen through our mailing list. Our next event following today, obviously our first webinar, will be a lunchtime event, and we'll have obviously lunchtime and evening events across the year. So I remind you to keep up to speed with our event calendar, which is all located on our website, builtdigitalsa.com.au. So with that, I'd like to firstly thank our friends at DBM Vircon for providing their insight and their time today. And we have an exciting presentation on the Brisbane City Council's digital approach and an overview of the digital engineering application for the Brisbane Metro project. Today we have Lindsay Offner. Lindsay is a senior digital project manager with DBM Vircon's digital engineering consulting team. He's also experienced in delivering complex digital engineering projects for major infrastructure clients. He supports the advisory, delivery and data focused services to DBM Vircon clients across asset owners, project delivery authorities and even principal contracts. So thank you, Lindsay, for being here today. Lindsay's co-speaker today is Negar Abedi. Negar is a digital project manager at DBM Vircon, and she also works with the digital engineering consultancy team within the organisation. Her background is in architecture and construction, and she's worked in the architecture, engineering and construction industry as a designer and project manager before joining DBM Vircon. She's been heavily involved in this project, and she has been tasked with the responsibilities of supporting the Brisbane City Council as the project's principal link in providing value to the project through digital engineering. So with that, I will allow Lindsay and Negar to share their screen and present today. And with that, I will allow them obviously to then make a start to our session. So thank you, Lindsay and Negar.
Fantastic, thank you. Start with, can you see our screen? Just to check.
Can you see our screen? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you, but because I'm not, I'm just going to. Yep, we can see your screen. All good.
Thank you.
Yep.
We'll kick off. Thanks for your time, everyone. It's been a good week so far. Don't feel like further introductions are really required after that one, but it's quickly on your screens. With evening, thank you. So start with, I've been crook for about 4 days, so my voice is slowly giving up on me. DBM Vircon, just as a quick introduction, with actually a multidisciplinary company, but out of that, we started a BIM and digital engineering commercial business unit quite early in the piece, back in, I think it was about 2016, potentially, that it started commencing before my time. And across that, we've really built a network throughout Australia, but even globally now as well, which gives us, a fairly broad perspective across a large portfolio of digital engineering implementations, which we'll be leveraging to a degree for this presentation, in addition to our work on Brisbane Metro. as well. So hopefully you get some good insights from what we have to share. Our project experience, slides are quite old now, but we've focused to date fairly heavily on major infrastructure projects, particularly early into industry adoption. It was typically your major infrastructure projects that were utilizing BIM or specifying BIM on their projects. And then from there, we've also picked up some of the more medium scale projects as well and brought value where we can. For Brisbane Metro, it's an interesting project in that the specification itself was written about in 2019, which is about a year and a half before any sort of tendering activities or the like actually occurred on the project. So one of the challenges for Negar and myself is even to date, we're working to quite an old specification for the project, which we prepared. So, you know, even in the time since preparing it, we had a lot of lessons learned that we came into the project with and would have done a lot of it differently if we could. It looks like our videos paused. But within the Brisbane Metro project, we are client side, so we're working with Brisbane City Council. And within that Brisbane City Council engagement, we're working across a couple of their major infrastructure projects, but Brisbane Metro specifically actually has three. So we've got the vehicles procurement, which there's no real BIM specification or deliverable for. There's a collaborative partnership for the main network, and then there's a Rochelle depot, which is a DNC as well. It's interesting in that, you know, on one project portfolio, we have three projects, all with different contractual structures and different adoption of BIM, and we get a good perspective on what that actually means for implementation. I think being client side as well, one of the real points of difference that I think we experience compared to a lot of the design companies or principal contractor companies is when we look at digital engineering, you know, the standard definition you'll see is it's a digital representation of the physical world. And to do that, we use domains like BIM or GIS or CAD, for example. And that comes with a lot of expectations about how do you represent it, how do you leverage that representation for whatever your responsibilities are. As a client-side representative, we have different responsibilities to what most people would experience just by nature. And we also have a smaller team typically than most of your design or principal contractor companies would have when they're delivering this infrastructure. So what we really need to focus on isn't necessarily this is what BIM is. We need to focus on how do we generate value from this solution for our clients. And we'll run through how we do that in our further slides, but I think it is a good point to focus on in that really we want to be introducing solutions that are valuable for the organizations you're involved with more than anything else. And it's a big part of a lot of what we get queried on when we're working with organizations like Brisbane City Council. They are, despite, you know, having projects that have been adopting BIM for 3 or 4 years now, a lot of the back end, like the actual handover, the operations, the rest of the organization, they're only just now starting to really look at, well, what's our strategy, what's our roadmap, and all the rest. So we've been working project side, delivering BIM, but now they're going through the rest of the process about how do we leverage this information, how do we maintain this information, and what values are going to bring us. And that's really something that I think having in your back pocket, I typically, you know, look to Digital Build Britain, for example, is always a great resource, even though they're now no longer operating, but having just examples that you can demonstrate to people around, you know, there's studies, there's research, there's evidence of value for the processes that we're doing really makes a lot of those conversations easier for us. And I think it's one that I imagine most organizations, design or construction side, would also be querying you on as well. So I'd love to see more research out of Australia as well, to be honest. I think there's a few universities that are really starting to take this seriously now, or at the very least here in Brisbane there are. Talking to how we generate value client side, one of the, I think, often overlooked use cases and values that bring in BIM and digital engineering brings to organisations is just around communication and engagement, which is why I want to start here, because I do think it's underappreciated in a lot of the project delivery experiences I've had. And in particular, a lot of our responsibilities come down to how, something's occurred. There's been an event. Someone will come to us and ask for additional information, or to fly around BIM models, for example, or to prepare content so that they can communicate something to their stakeholders, which, a lot of people maybe don't get perspective on. But client side, you've got quite a small team. You've got maybe a project manager per package of works or major area within your project. And then that project manager will typically have 6 stakeholders in that location, or whatever it happens to be, depending on the location. Our TV's just turned off, apologies. So it's one of the items where if you can clearly communicate to your clients as project manager in this example, it enables them to distribute that, whatever you prepared for them, to their stakeholders or to the other organisations that they need to interface with, so that we can get really quick and informed decision making. To be honest with you, we do get a lot of queries just coming off the back of a meeting where a design team, for example, has been trying to demonstrate some component of their proposed design on 2D PDFs or CAD drawings, which is fair enough. There's a lot of professionals that are still more comfortable with that format when they're presenting it, and they can be sure of what they're showcasing in those scenarios. But it really comes down to, 2D is great if you know what you're looking at, but if you're coming into it fresh and you don't actually know what you're looking at on those 2D PDFs, for example, it can be quite difficult to interpret. What am I looking at? What are they trying to communicate to me? What actions do I need to make, or how should I be involved in this process? I think that's one where I really would like to see, not that no one's doing it, and even within Brisbane Metro project, we've seen much better adoption of this kind of style from the parties we're working with. But I think everyone would benefit from really looking at, how do I engage with my client? How do I communicate what I'm trying to communicate to them in a way that is just a very clear illustration of whatever we're discussing? And then from that, the benefit should be they can go off and they can make an informed decision because they clearly understood what you were trying to present to them. In this example here, it's some of the work Negar's been doing.
As Lindsay said, we are dealing with a lot of technical and non-technical stakeholders within the project, and most of the locations are going to, or like the aim is to keep them operational as much as possible and not affect the community's day-to-day activities. So it is really important to be able to see the design and the accurate representation of what is going to happen, and how these different elements are interacting with each other. So we're not looking at one design package in isolation. You will be able to look at this design package, how it is interacting with other packages, architectural versus structural, the passenger information signages, how they are, like where they are located, if they are providing enough information, or are they accessible. We are able to just do this within the model, within that accurate representation of the design, and walk through from the pedestrian line of sight or a driver's line of sight, and give that sensation and a feeling of the environment, how this all going to work. And obviously, it really helps with that informed decision making and time management and everything else.
In these slide examples, these were prepared for that purpose, but when we actually presented to the stakeholders in this example, it was in a meeting format. So we had the model open that we would fly around so that they could query various locations and the rest. And then in addition to that, we used both the design reports in the 2D snips you saw and image exports from the model, so that we could showcase sort of the key signage or some of these key items to those stakeholders in the meeting. And then that meeting wasn't a digital engineering meeting, it was a design meeting with the stakeholders. So we had Brisbane City Council as project management, we had our stakeholders, but then the principal designers and their subcontractors were also involved in that meeting, so that everyone could sort of clearly communicate what they need to the stakeholder, so that the stakeholder had confidence in what was being proposed and that the signage for this precinct was going to work for them. But also that everyone was there and available to sort of answer any queries that popped up as well. Just another one. Is this video paused again?
No, it's just finished.
Yeah.
And next thing, it's just using again that model, which is showcasing the most recent design decisions and the final, like not final, but the stage approved outcomes of the design, and use that to communicate that design decision and what is going to happen around the city to community, which obviously is a very easy way of informing them of what is going to happen with all the disruption they may experience. This is the outcome they're going to get, and again, especially with trying to keep everything operational and trying to keep the community informed of all the changes that is happening to the construction or any other activity around the project. It makes it really easy to just communicate and transmit all those information to the community. And yeah, another example of using that accurate representation and what is going to happen to the community as part of the Brisbane City Council newsletters, which is being distributed around the city.
This film, we're not focusing on a lot of the sort of typical applications of, it's great for design coordination, it's great for complication, improve your schedule and all the rest. This is one where one of the important responsibilities of Brisbane City Council is to communicate to the public what this proposed infrastructure is going to be. It's a public transport network. And in that, even, early days before we were involved, they had some community renders that misrepresented the reference design. And from that, there was a lot of community inquiry, obviously, about the renders that had been produced. And there were some issues that came out of that with the design that had been rendered and communicated to the public. And the result of that was Brisbane City Council having to say, oh, look, sorry, that was a fault with the rendering. That's not actually our reference design. We recognise that will not work. So following from that event, it's really been about, well, we have the models and we want to clearly illustrate these designs to the community, still relying on visualisation renders and videos and the like. This is an opportunity for the 3D geometry that the design teams are already authoring to provide value to your responsibilities as an organisation. Moving into design and construction, this is probably where a lot of your typical responsibilities creep in. Again, being client side, we don't necessarily have the same responsibilities that a design or construction organisation would. It is client side, or at least within the digital engineering team, it's not necessarily our responsibility for your design to be coordinated. We want it to be. Obviously, everyone involved in the project wants it to be. But our responsibilities within the digital engineering team are your typical Flash coordination activities. That's a responsibility that belongs with the design team, and you don't necessarily want to duplicate the work, although often we do conduct some of those activities just as verification or by request from some of the project management teams, for example. A lot of what our responsibilities do is in items like the specification of the project, for example. So making sure digital engineering deliverables are captured in the project deed or the project specification technical requirements, depending where you are, and establishing those requirements so that Brisbane City Council, with the ultimate goal of having a good design, a good construction outcome, can use the deed to influence some of those outcomes. And what we want through design principally is confidence. And it's a great opportunity for design organisations and for construction organisations to influence confidence with their clients using BIM and digital engineering. It's very, very easy for you to show a client a 3D model and say, look, this is a coordinated design. I'm demonstrating it on my screen that there are no issues. This is how my design is going to work. This is what my construction sequence is. This is my construction management strategy, whatever it happens to be. And again, they can just interpret it very quickly. I don't have to sit through 1,000 PDFs and understand that, oh, yeah, I have confidence in their design. I can look at a location and I can very quickly understand what you are proposing to me. I can very quickly understand that you have designed it well and that I have confidence with your proposed strategies, whatever it happens to be. I think confidence is one we'll talk to a little bit further out of this presentation as well, but I think this is it's not that organizations aren't doing it, don't get me wrong. I just don't think a lot of, again, slightly underappreciated, potentially, at least in my experience with these major infrastructure projects, is the role confidence plays in just your interactions with the client. And just, you know, from a cultural perspective, particularly like a collaborative partnership project, for example, where working in the office together every day. It's just great for culture. It's great for the actual design. It's great for interactions with the client as well. And I do think that BIM and digital engineering plays a big role in how you communicate that confidence, or, you know, bring about that confidence. Is it more down to our day-to-day responsibilities?
Yeah, so just talking a bit more in the detail about what we do in the project is just that. So on a weekly basis, we receive all these design updates through different information containers and shared, published, and we federate all these models into one federated model for different locations using different automated processes. So then we use that federated model for all this communication and all the other use cases that we talked about before. We have weekly meetings with the client and other anyone involved in the project that needs to be informed. They join and they have a look at all the updates, so they are informed of all the design updates and all the new decisions on all the new changes on weekly basis. That makes it really easy for them. They sometimes get just some snips, use it for their communication, their internal communication, or if they have any stakeholder engagements. Meeting coming up. Apart from all that, we do quality checks. We review the models, making sure the specification and requirements that are specified in the LOD and LOI matrices are met, which again, that comes to that delivery confidence. Some of these assets are going to be returned to the asset owners like TMR or any other organization, and they all have their own requirements. So we go through these models and make sure these requirements are met. If they're not, we communicate it to the team and basically trying to work through that partnership with all the different parties and get as much as possible, get the quality that is needed. Well, the coordination is a big, one of the biggest, I would say, benefits and use cases. Brisbane City Council had that initiated back in the years to do activity and capture all these services around the city, underground services, and using that existing services, they shared it with the tenderers. That brought that confidence in the accuracy in the tender response, and at the same time during the project delivery, considering all those different locations that they're working in, they're all brownfield, all these existing services underground, existing structures, and different stakeholders in different locations. They use that, leverage that information. Brisbane Move as the design and construction partner use that information for their design packages and the alignment between these existing environments and what they're proposing.
They actually commenced the existing survey modelling before any reference design was conducted, or during reference design, apologies. And because of the now age of this project. This was back when people still talked about Sydney Light Rail. And they looked at Sydney Light Rail and they went, we don't want that to happen to us. So this was, a client initiative to go out. They spent their money to conduct these survey works so that any of the tendering parties could coordinate with the existing services at that phase of the project. Again, to the confidence discussion, it gave Brisbane City Council confidence in the proposed designs because they knew what the impacts were to the existing underground utility networks. But it also meant that they were more confident in, the designs that were being proposed, that they had been considerate of that existing brownfield environment. To this slide earlier as well, just to reinforce the confidence in coordination. This is actually, it's Victoria Bridge here, but it's an existing bridge. It's quite old now. I think it's 80 years, 60 years, something like that. We're doing strengthening works on it. The strategy here was to resurvey the entire bridge structure, including all of the reinforcement in it, so that strengthening works could occur. And that there was the confidence that the proposed design for the strengthening works was going to be coordinated with that existing structure and how people were going to manage it. And it involved a lot of people in confined spaces, for example, in the bridge girders, looking at those assets, mapping, modelling, and all the rest. But the outcome from this is when you talk to the project managers and we talk to the client side involved, they can look at this and they know that this proposed strengthening works is actually going to be achievable, that it's a good solution, which I think, particularly with this would have been a challenging environment to represent in 2D. It would have been a challenging environment to communicate your proposed design to the client in 2D as well. So this has, been a great outcome. There's a bit of an expense in the actual surveying works, but the design outcomes they got from it were just so efficient. It's a great productivity item.
And of course, clash detection is, as mentioned before, this is something that we sometimes do based on client request to just make sure what is being proposed is coordinated, it has the minimum issues possible at any time that is being captured. Very easy way to identify issues and see how these different packages, for example, if we have security elements, if we have HVAC elements, and all these different pipes, electrical elements, how they're interacting. If they have clashes, we can report them and communicate them to the design and construction team early on, early stages of the project, so that we are able to review the design and check it out, and also obviously resolve the issues before going to the construction site and see, for example, that frame is not fit in the allocated location.
And then for all of this, just for our approach, we adopt the same solutions as everyone else. We couldn't get Rivetstow licenses on the project, but apart from that, it's your typical, for the age of this project anyway, typical approach of just using Navisworks, automating federation, and all the rest, so that we can get to a product that can be used for clash detection, communication, coordination, and all the rest as well. Through the construction stage, this is an interesting one. And when the spec was written, there wasn't a lot of experience with the construction phase of BIM. We had some prior projects that had gone through practical completion that had been deliverables that we'd written specs for, but that I was involved. But they weren't necessarily the same infrastructure type as Brisbane Metro. And one of the big lessons learned we've had out of this project is, one, as time's gone on, the client or Brisbane City Council in this example has started to realise a lot of the value that items like 4D program sequencing in the model brings to them as an organisation as well. Just in the same discussion about clearly interpreting a proposed construction program. But at the time when this spec was written, as an organisation, they didn't necessarily want it. Or, they hadn't experienced anything like this before. So it's hard to put something in the contract like you must do 4D program sequencing as a deliverable for this project. If no one involved actually thinks they need it or it's going to generate value for them, for example. But as time's progressed and they've started to kind of become more involved with BIM and working with 3D deliverables, they're really starting to see the value from that. So, you know, even for the next projects that we're involved with Brisbane City Council, the discussion would be, this was a missed opportunity on Brisbane Metro. Should we introduce this as a contractual deliverable for the next project? Which obviously brings challenges to your principal contractors, in that I think a lot of organisations are still exploring this space in terms of how do they as an organisation management, what's their solution. You do not necessarily want a process where you've got a BIM team that is interpreting a P6 schedule and then applying that over the top of the model as well, because it's quite inefficient. So it often involves a lot of training with the principal contractors, schedulers, so that they can use solutions like Synchro, for example, to apply those P6 schedules to the 3D model and kind of generate both in parallel, so that the model benefits the schedule and the schedule benefits the communications by using the model. So it's still, you know, in my assessment, a bit of a tricky environment, my experience, I should say. And I think our principal contractors as a whole, there's still a lot of growth that's occurring in that area. Even for the last year and a half, seen, you know, a lot more interest from principal contractors for their application. And I think that's going to be a great milestone for the industry when the principal contractors start looking at these processes and introducing their own requirements to their subcontractors, saying this is what we need for our value as an organisation. And that'll probably influence a lot of change as well, just for the way that our current contracts work. I think another big item out of our constructions lessons learned was that at the time we weren't necessarily considerate of construction parcels versus design packages. So that's something that's popped up with our collaborative partnership. And because it's a collaborative partnership, we've been able to sit down and resolve it. We're all working to the same result, right? We want to deliver this well. But in our contract, it's not really reflected. So one of the opportunities that, or one of the challenges we nearly introduced in that, to be honest about it, is that we wrote a contract that was looking at BIM deliverables for design packages. But then if you had a design package that was split across multiple construction parcels, it wasn't necessarily considerate of that scenario. And it was introducing a lot of confusion and ambiguity. And it's definitely something we're looking at rectifying in the future, so that the deliverables are aligned based on whatever that works package happens to be at that point in time as well. With all of this, the actual site activities like commissioning and all the rest that we're expecting to see client side, they're starting to occur now. So it's going to be great to start seeing those deliverables coming through from our principal contractors around, you know, capturing the actual as-built location, even, for example, but then linking that to their commissioning data and to their operational manuals and all the rest. And that's one where there's, you know, it's still a very interesting space, and that there's a lot of solutions. There's a lot of ways to skin that cat, but hopefully the results will be good. Same with this is an example of construction sequencing from the Brisbane Metro project, even though it wasn't specified, purely because our principal contractor identified that this sequence of works was critical, obviously, but there was a lot of safety considerations. There was a lot of communication that had to go into this, and there's a lot of planning that had to go into this. So they took the design and they went through additional modelling activities so that they had a model that would work for their program sequencing activities for a start, but then so they could leverage that model for their value as well. Which I think was a good result. And this is all moving into operations, which from experience is still considered too late on most projects, to be honest with you, particularly for things like handover asset registers, templates, and a lot of the times your clients aren't necessarily in a position where they're thinking about that either. And Brisbane City Council is an example of that. Like I mentioned earlier, the asset management teams weren't, you know, this was a project delivery focus at the time, and the asset management teams are getting involved now. And that brings with it a lot of challenges, obviously, but principle to all of that, and I think something that a lot of the industry isn't necessarily considerate of, or maybe empathetic of would be a better word, is that a lot of these organisations with existing asset strategies aren't set up for BIM deliverables. The way we represent our assets in BIM is very different to the way we represent our assets in CAD or PDFs or GIS. And we treat it like a big 3D database, which is great. We can give them any information they need if they've spec'd it. But the existing systems, the enterprise asset management systems, the way they classify their assets, the attributes they want for them, aren't always considerate of the way we represent our systems, or even more specifically when we get to the product level within our model. A lot of the time that isn't necessarily in place, and that's where a lot of our challenges come into play. It's probably where a lot of the frustrations are generated across industry when you start getting involved with asset management templates, like asset register templates and things like that, for example. It's just as a result of that. Organisations are going through the transformation process of defining asset strategies with BIM in mind now, though. So hopefully in a couple of years' time, 5 years' time, whatever it happens to be, we have a very different environment. I think one of the real items that a lot of industry needs to be considerate of when we get to that state is that what you're specified to do in a contract is a result of an organisation's strategy, of them identifying what attributes they need for their asset management. And once they've gone through that process, it's tied directly into their productivity in maintaining those assets, or the value that these models will be generating for them. And in that scenario, if you're not delivering to those requirements, I think that's something where we need a bit of caution, because that's where things like litigation and the like start to become apparent or start to occur within the industry. Haven't really seen a lot of examples of them yet. For now, though, it's a bit like the Wild West, isn't it? We're all trying to make our solutions fit with existing systems, and it's working fairly well. It's a very productive way of handing over asset information, but I don't think we've quite realised, like, the, when you look at ISO 19650, for example, when organisations go through identifying their objectives and then their requirements and then producing data schemas and specifications off the back of that. We're not quite there yet for a lot of organisations, at least in Queensland. Then with these discussions with council, council's interest at the moment is very challenge focused, to be honest with you. So as an organisation, we would still recommend that if you're going through this process, you adopt something like ISO 19650 or BDSA's, great guidelines where it shows your responsibilities or what you should be considerate of in your role within an organisation. I definitely would recommend starting at objectives and requirements. But for now, a lot of our discussions are focusing on the challenges that council is experiencing, for example. And I've sort of summarised them here, but I think one of the key ones that I've been trying to reinforce with my interactions with the organisation and with a lot of organisations is that digital engineering should really be considered as an organisational solution, not necessarily as a technology solution. What I mean by that is that if you're just getting your technology team involved to establish a solution for digital engineering data, you're not necessarily getting all of the value you would be through communications or asset management, your actual performance of those assets, that kind of process. So in this, really, again, ISO 19650, BDAS, very great standards to look at. You should be considering digital engineering as, we have these organisational objectives. How do we leverage BIM or anything else? This is just part of the picture, but how do we leverage the information that we're getting through project delivery to meet those objectives and to bring value to our organisation? From that, change is probably the big challenge, not just the client side, but for all of the industry. This is one where, I've seen proper change management professionals work in this space now with digital engineering projects, and I think our entire industry would have benefited if we were more change considerate or change management considerate 8 years ago, to be honest with you. But this is one where we are, with people attending this webinar and the people involved in BIM digital engineering, we're passionate about it. We had an interest in it. We developed our skill sets to have roles in BIM or digital engineering. Everybody else, that's not their passion, that's not their interests. They're, in most cases, like you look at a design organisation, they're already working 40+ hours a week, and you're just introducing something new for them to learn. It doesn't necessarily matter if it's going to bring value to whatever their responsibilities are as a professional. It's still something new, and that brings with it challenges. So a lot of what we have to be careful about is, one, supporting people through this process with changing, with training and the like, but also how do we communicate this? You know, your current responsibilities are X. This will introduce change Y. The benefit of this change is C, for example. I think, you know, that's one where, depending on the scale of your organization, is quite an undertaking, obviously, but as being more digital engineering professionals, it's definitely something that we all need to be considerate of. And in that, I would recommend focusing more on responsibilities than way of working. I often use the example of, you know, early days we introduced BIM to design consultancies, for example, specifications to design consultancies. All of the initial pushback was, that's not our responsibility to produce 3D models for you. We're going to do CAD drawings. In that scenario, you know, as a design professional, your responsibility isn't to produce CAD drawings either. That's just a way of working. It's a deliverable. It's your responsibility to design whatever that infrastructure is. It's your responsibility to document that infrastructure so that the other parties involved can use it. But then, you know, a lot of it got confused with the way of working, which was CAD at the time. And we've obviously come a long way since then. Knowledge challenges are one where, you know, we would experience this quite frequently as BIM or digital engineering professionals, but a lot of people don't necessarily know what BIM is, or, you know, the knowledge is developing, but a lot of people still don't really know what it is, or specifically, or more importantly, what the value is. But then these knowledge challenges often go down to a very technical, granular level of, well, how do I actually implement this? What do I need to do within my role as a professional? Best thing you can do here is just spend the time to educate people as much as possible. They don't necessarily need to become BIM or digital engineering professionals, but they will benefit from some knowledge about what the value is or what they need to be considerate of their roles. And then the commercial challenges. So this is really just focusing on contracts, essentially. But this is still something where, if you look at an organisation, the scale of Brisbane City Council, for example, which is, I think, the largest local government authority in the Southern Hemisphere, they have thousands of small-scale infrastructure projects per year. And then, you know, they've got a portfolio of major projects, and they've got all of their asset management contracts for operators and the like. This is one where the commercial challenges involved are still within this organisation being explored within Brisbane City Council. But it is still important, and still something that a lot of organisations need to be considerate of as well. But realistically, for council, that's almost like the last step in their journey. They're going through their strategy, they're going to identify their objectives. From that, they'll get their requirements, and then they can start introducing the commercial changes needed with their supply chain to meet those objectives, which will be great to see when it comes through. From that, hopefully we've left enough time for questions. We had to run through quite a few years.
Thank you, that was wonderful. Yeah, well done, and congratulations on such an exciting project. There seems to be a lot of digital activity, and obviously Brisbane City Council seem to be acknowledging the value, which is fantastic. So we do have 10 minutes for questions, and I will pop up the question dialogue box and ask you those questions as we move through, if that's okay. And if you do have any other questions to the attendees, just pop them into the question dialogue box at your leisure. If we don't get to them today, we'll make sure we respond after the webinar. So the first question here is, it's great to see a presentation around project delivery and bringing in value to design. And this person would like to know more in regards to which digital stakeholder engagement or collaboration platforms you use and how effective they are with the client in representing some of the use cases.
Digital collaboration platforms that I'm interpreting that primarily as things like Revisto or BIMTrack, for example, where we have an environment that supports the 3D model, but still utilizing things like the issue tracker for communications and for coordination and for resolving metadata and all the rest. The answer is we tried to implement it on Brisbane City Council. We even had free licenses of Revisto at one point so that they could get into the environment and start exploring it. the result of that, and just because the scale of the organisation was that it was too difficult to introduce through the ICT team, unfortunately. Having worked on other projects, fantastic. I think Rivitsto is the prominent solution in industry now for a reason. Even between, I've got experience on one job with Navisworks and another with Rivitsto. The Rivitsto project, not to sound like I'm trying to sell the product, because it's more user intuitive and user friendly, it promotes sort of more interaction with the solution than something like Navisworks does, for example, which is a big part of it. You're not going to get value if no one's actually using the solutions you have in place. From that, on Brisbane City Council, we don't have the opportunity, unfortunately, but we do have Negar sitting in the office, and client side, it is quite small in the team. So it's very easy for any project manager to just come over and tap her on the shoulder, for example. In that environment, though, our collaborative designers are using Rivitsto so that they can do their issue tracking and coordination and the rest as well. So it's one where, client side, again, talking about responsibility primarily, it's not a huge impact to our delivery by not having that solution.
Sure.
The designers are introducing it because it does bring value to them.
Is the client allowing you free rein to provide them with the data based on what the end deliverable is, or are you obviously checking the data requirements as a continual consultation as the project grows?
We have a few data requirements. So again, a bit of a legacy now, but there was an LOI matrix produced for the job as a template, and that was following engagement with, at the time, the stakeholders and the data sources they had available to them. So here that was Transport and Main Roads, one of the key stakeholders, and then Brisbane City Council as well. Following that engagement, they introduced new standards or new data schemas came to life. So thankfully, it's one of the collaborative projects, so we're able to reintroduce a lot of those items. The guy goes through a lot of the process of actually reviewing the deliverables or the BIM deliverables and making sure they're compliant with those specifications. What we're now experiencing is we've engaged with Brisbane City Council asset management team. We've gotten their asset register templates and their data schemas and the like. We're going through this handover process, and a lot of items are coming to light as they become more involved, saying like, oh, we don't really capture the asset information in that way anymore. We're working through new data standards projects, or we're introducing new templates, or whatever it is. So there is a little bit of a challenge there at the moment. Commercially, it's kind of, they had their opportunity. We've produced the specification that at the time was accurate for what they need. But
yeah, sure.
The best results is it.
Because who defined the LOI requirements for the project? You said there was some stuff that was done previously. Was that you helping them define that?
So
or?
We've defined it. Our key stakeholders are TMR, BCC, but we've also got like the Queensland utilities as well that we've had to engage with for their standards. From that though, and on all our projects, we go through an engagement period with the principal contractor and the designers around that LOI spec to find out what is achievable within that specification. So for Brisbane Metro, we went through the same process over a period of a few months, really like, look, this is what people have asked for, within this, what is actually achievable, and then just making sure that was, approved from the client side as well. Yeah.
Because essentially you guys acted as the information management lead for the project, and it relates to one of the questions here around the client's appetite for internal information management leads rather than external consultants. What are your opinions on that?
One of the, as mentioned, they're going through a strategy at the moment. That's one of the items in that strategy. Even as an organisation as a whole, information management in general is something that through this strategy, from my understanding, they should be coming out of the other side of that with objectives around improving their information management solutions. So they have an archiving solution in place, they've got document management solutions in place, but when you look to a lot of the modern solutions for information management, that hasn't necessarily been introduced to the organisation yet. Again, a huge organisation. It's not a small introduction by any means to Brisbane City Council. There's thousands of employees. There's a lot of different responsibilities that would then need to adopt an information management solution, but it's high on their radar, talking to the asset management teams and even, you know, a lot of the design and maintenance professionals in the organisation. Just being able to quickly discover the information they need is a very important topic. And then in that, the expectation is they would be going internal as well, so upskilling their existing staff. They've already got people within the organisation that are responsible for, you know, archiving, document management or asset management, for example. It would be about training those resources and introducing new ways of working.
Yeah, what we're seeing is that a lot of clients are actually procuring external resources to start with, and then obviously developing a capability uplift program internally to support that. So that's, yeah, it's really interesting. Look, we'll leave it there, and I just want to thank you both. It was just a fabulous presentation. I think the feedback's been great. We've had a good turnout today, and I'd just like to again, you know, thank everyone for attending. And just quickly, I will pop into the chat the registration for our next event, which will be an event that we're hosting as a lunchtime event. And I will send you guys, if it's okay, the remaining questions, and we can pop them on the website. We've recorded the webinar. We'll be obviously hosting the webinar on our website, but also obviously any questions to obviously this team, we're more than happy to take. So I'll just grab the link for the future webinar and then let everyone get back to their day. But again, thank you guys. That was just fantastic.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Definitely.
Feel free to reach out to either of us if you have any questions as well.
We will do, and I'll send you the questions in an email, the ones we didn't get to, and maybe we can just pop them on our LinkedIn group.
Fantastic.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.